John, thank you so much for joining me here today. And I'm looking forward to talking about your basketball career. But I want to start really at the very beginning, back at your Roosevelt High days, and really just see, were you always kind of focused on basketball, or did you have other interests? I mean, I've heard stories about your kickball career before basketball. So just tell us a little bit about kind of like your focuses growing up, whether it was only on basketball or other interests.
Yeah, well, first of all, again, Evan, thank you for having me on. Was highly impressed with you in my first introduction, so happy to be a part of the conversation. Basketball for me was not my first love or first sport, so sort of predating where I left off with high school. I really started playing football. So I was a defensive end and tight end. And a lot of that stemmed from me just being the big, chunky, awkward kid that, really was just trying to find myself. So really grew to love the sport. And then speaking of grow, I grew 4 inches throughout the course of a summer. And, people started going more for my knees because they couldn't take me down up top. So along with that time, it was sort of in between this transition between my family. So my mother and father divorced, and my father played professional basketball when I was a kid. So it had us in Finland for 2 years, Turkey for 6. So a lot of my early years were watching him play basketball. So I really never had any interest. But when they divorced, I realized that there was a void that was left in my heart. And so in sort of this wanting or desire to connect with my father, coupled with the fact that I grew 4 inches through the course of the summer, I started gravitating towards basketball. So I had a late start, and I technically started officially playing basketball when I was 15 years old. And it just became one of those things that I wanted to prove to myself. I wanted to sort of, in my father's absence, stay connected to him. The life lessons that he gave me around sacrifice and some of the things that it takes to become, more of an elite professional. I started early, and so I'd get up early in the morning and I'd run. I did all the things that he did, and then slowly, these coaches that were becoming mentors for me was sort of how I forged my path. So that's how basketball became to be.
And was part of that, I know you grew up in Minneapolis and you ended up staying in Minnesota to go to college at the University of Minnesota. Was part of that decision to stay close to home and to those people that were important to you, or kind of just describe your path of ending up at the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, and actually, my father did end up coming back into our lives, and he was an influence. But at the same time, I think there was so much uncertainty and sort of the earlyhood trauma that I had been through as a kid, and growing up where I was growing up and without the father in my life. What I've learned about myself was that there was this need for certainty, and the thing that I knew was home, and recognizing that, when the chips fall, who are you going to have to sort of lean on? So that's where my mother was a strong resource, my brother, my sister, and then subsequently the coaches that were sort of helping to raise me, and the people that were around the community. It just was home. So it was a big influence for me. And Dave Thorson, who's now, again, the University of Minnesota assistant coach, he was very diligent in making sure that I understood the type of resource that I would have and how good it was for me to stay home. So that's ultimately why I chose not to go on any school visits, although I was being heavily recruited. I didn't want to waste anyone's time or money. I had made up my decision, and so I wasn't trying to get a ride out to Hawaii just because I could, or go to Arizona or Kansas or any of the top schools that were recruiting me. I was just like, I made my decision, and here's where I'm at. So that's how I landed in Minnesota.
That is very mature of you, because a lot of 17, 18-year-olds, they definitely want to take full advantage, even if they've already made their decision. So I applaud you on that. And, this was a great time to be a part of University of Minnesota basketball. Did you kind of have that feeling when you got there? I mean, obviously, you just talked about the connection you have to the state of Minnesota and the community. Did you have a feeling when you got there that something special was brewing, or did this kind of happen over your time there?
It happened over our time, because I think the what I've been able to see through the 4 years that I was at the university is this essence of culture. And the culture, the tone of that culture was set by Clem Haskins, our head coach. And so when I think about culture, it has this feeling of family where you're not always going to get along, but you at least have a clear understanding of who's the person in charge and what is it that they want. And unlike today, where you've got a lot of kids that if their feelings are hurt and if their parents are telling them otherwise and they don't understand how to sort of stick through the adversity, they end up in a transfer portal. So for us, it was about starting where we started. And as a freshman, I was so raw, but I was willing to work. And that was something that was instilled in the culture, which was, sort of this hard hat approach. I mean, we had play hard on the butt of our shorts. Coach Haskins would, between the lines, he would test you. And if you weren't coming out the other end, there was a reason why. And so from freshman year on, it was just, work became sort of my calling card, and I did the things that other people didn't. And and we had other teammates that also were willing to do the other things that others wouldn't. And through it all, we stuck together. We played ball together. We were hanging out all the time. And like I said, didn't mean that every single one of us got along all the time, but the core values that were instilled with us without necessarily even pointing to, hey, this is an exercise we're going to go through to sort of fulfill these values, is the reason why I believe we were able to succeed at the level we did by the time I was a senior.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, can we talk about that for just a second? You talked about having play hard on the butt of your shorts, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to play hard just because, it's written on your shorts or it's on the wall. Right. What were some of the subtle things that maybe reflecting back, you noticed that the coaching staff was doing that maybe they weren't pointing to at the time, but like in what ways were they subtly building this culture?
Well, they set the tone. Right. Everything always starts at the top. Right. And that's the thing that I've seen even through sport, not only through my collegiate playing days, my professional playing days, is it's all about leadership. And you set the tone of what you're trying to accomplish with culture by first holding people accountable to what the expectations are, and then ultimately creating some level of reward system which keeps people engaged. And it was really that simple. I think that by setting the tone, it was how practice was being shaped, what we were doing, how we were communicating. I mean, the essence of image, like the fact that, Coach Haskins, and I think a lot of his guys still sort of wear, even after the fact, they might wear some facial hair. I mean, he was to a T. He wouldn't have, like, you're not going to wear facial hair. He's like, you see what I have? This is all you're allowed to have. So he didn't want his team to look sloppy, where every time he would say, once you step across the line, the drawstring in your shorts had to be tight and your jersey had to be tucked in. For if guys had tattoos, I mean, he'd say, see, son, you had a bad game because you're out there thinking about the next tattoo you're going to get. So it was the mindset around creating this focus as to how we were expected to play. And then practice was no joke. And it was long. It was tough. It commanded your attention in a way that got and set the tone for working hard. And that's the reason why it was built in the culture that was what we became to be.
Yeah. And I saw this in football throughout my career as well, as those teams that were willing to put in that work and really to, as you said, cross those lines with a workman mentality, were really the ones that were able to elevate from good to great teams, or even just average teams to good teams.
Right.
It's not always about just the talent you have on your team. But that being said, you guys did have a couple of players that ended up in the NBA, yourself included, and just kind of talk about that magical 1997 season where you guys did make the Final Four. I can remember watching you guys throughout that season and into the tournament. Was it something where you guys felt like, man, this is going to be the culmination of everything? Or again, was it kind of like a gradual build and just kind of focusing on your work every single day? And then you look up down the road and you're in the tournament, you're in the Final Four. Just kind of take us back to that season and what do you remember about it?
Yeah, so I think anytime you as a coach, when you think about bringing anybody aboard or as a leader within any organization, is you think about sort of casting what that teammate that comes into the organization, what that looks like. It first, they have to be a cultural fit. Second, they have to, exhibit the values that you believe you have. And some people are really good at articulating them. Some people just know it by gut instinct. And I think that's where Coach Haskins was. So by bringing in the additional pieces of Quincy Lewis, Bobby Jackson, Charles Thomas, these were all complementary pieces to what we had already had. And, the Courtney James who came in, at some point, and Sam, who was a staple, Sam Jacobson, who was a staple within our team, he saw that these pieces that he brought together were complementary. And the thing, as you were talking previously, what really came to mind was identification of role and what it means for us when a coach lines us up on the baseline, when we start to smell ourselves and think that we're the best thing since sliced bread because we're moving up the ranking charts. And it was always a level setting moment where, he's lining us up on the baseline and telling us about ourselves. What was our market, right? Our audience? What was the person who was in command? What did he think in case we thought we were moving in a different direction around our role? So I knew that I wasn't the type of person, although big men always think they can shoot threes and guards always want to be in the post. He made it clear that, son, you're not allowed to shoot at this stage. Now, I could argue that, in some capacity was limiting because it's like, it's a basketball play. Should I make it? But it at least allowed him to identify with what he wanted. And we all fit into that role. So when we're out of line, out of pocket, he was like, wait a second, hold up, let's stop practice. And he'd line up and say, son, you have no chance to play at this level. Son, you might work a nine. I mean, it was hard, but it was true. And so that role identification, I think, ultimately coupled with the key acquisitions that we made to get some of those players in to solidify our core, then they just enveloped into the culture. That's what, and then we got a chance to learn each other and we knew our tendencies. And again, the more we hung out, that proximity that was created through spending time with each other is how we were able to discern the type of relationships that we had, and we held each other accountable, right? Like I remember coach would say, in this, whether it's head coach, assistant coach, touch every line. And as a team captain, by the time I was, I think a junior, I was a captain and I was a co-captain. Then again, my senior year, like the coaches shouldn't have to tell you what to do. I mean, they're positioning you, but it's up to us to hold each other accountable. So when we weren't touching lines, if we had to run suicides, I would stop and no, we're doing this again. And people would get mad. And if I can't trust you in practice, I can't trust you in the game. So those little nuanced details of how this team came together was how I believe we were able to create that success.
Yeah, I'm hearing so much like team chemistry, like you guys actually like hung out. And as you said, not everybody has to be best friends, but we all respect each other and we're all here to hold ourselves to the high standards. Yes, we're going to play hard, but we also want to accomplish great things. And that's not done just by showing up and having great, talented players. You need kind of like these other pieces. I also love the accepting of the role. In football, we have Bill Belichick, who talks always about do your job. Mm-hmm. It's kind of this slogan that he's developed over his coaching career that's come to kind of personify the New England Patriots and their sustained success. And just that ability to kind of like focus in on, you don't shoot 3-pointers. That's not what we need you to do. For us to play at our highest level, we need you playing defense, getting rebounds, and really just being honest with everybody about what their role is so important. And it sounds like just a tremendous experience, obviously with the success that you guys had, but also to learn all of that under Coach Haskins. And as we transition into talking about your NBA career, did you kind of see any similarities in the coaches that you had in the NBA? Because I know a lot of times the pro coaches, it's a different approach. Sometimes I don't necessarily like want to say it's babysitting, but a lot of times it's like, let's just get to the game. What kind of similarities did you see in Coach Haskins' styles, and maybe what differences did you see as you transitioned into the NBA?
In my opinion, it's remarkably different. It's less to do about going back to my time in college, you're on a scholarship. And with that scholarship, particularly during the time that I played, there was no such thing as the transfer portal. And if you transferred, you had to sit out a year. So in many ways, the coaches held the power over whether or not you played. So it was up to you to decide whether or not you liked your role. And if you didn't like it, how you responded to it. And I think we're all in that position, whether it's within basketball or within business, we can decide the outcome based upon what the things that are happening that we can't control. So that, was I think remarkably different with my experience with Coach Hassans in college. Once you get to the pros, it's a player-centric league, and the players who have typically the command over their teams are in a lot of ways responsible for the livelihood of a lot of people, including the coaching staff. And so I think it's less about the babysitting aspect. You also have to remember there's now a different toll that's taken on your body when you go from 30 something games in college to now you're playing 82 plus. And it's hard work. It's what people don't understand is like your body hurts every single day as a professional. And not only that, but the mental toll that it takes because you're being asked to do so much by so many different people, inclusive of people that are in your own camp. And so through that, your brain isn't even fully developed, right? We know that to be true until you're about 25 years old. So we've got these expectations that we lump on young kids when they don't even know who they are. But the dopamine that's hitting them and chasing them, and they're seeing these tangible things that are in their hands that they've aspired to achieve, that no one else can tell them anything else because they feel like they've arrived. And I speak from that from experience. So I think when it comes to coaches at the NBA level, I think oftentimes they're hamstrung by the system that doesn't allow them to truly cultivate and develop those players into bona fide people. It becomes transaction based in that if we don't win, then I'm out, right? I mean, it's sort of this unwritten rule. And then it doesn't help when, as a society, it's almost this win now approach. And there's no such thing as the project that comes in to really think about how they're supposed to grow. And if you think about it, when you get drafted, just the adaptation that's needed to your environment, to the speed at which the game is played, to the location that you're actually in, the style of coaching, the rigorous travel, regardless to if you play or not. There's so much that you need to adapt to that just goes unseen, unheard, because the expectation is that you're making this good money and that you should perform every single night to the best of your ability. And then there's some education that comes along with that, right? Who am I? How is my body being positioned? It's an adjustment from 30 something games to 82. Like there's a lot that goes into it. So for coaches, I found just in my experience, I was traded twice within my first year. So I didn't really have the chance to get to learn Jeff Van Gundy because I was gone before I could hit the regular season. And once I got to play with Rick Pitino, it was a different style of coaching, different style of play, different philosophy overall. So I had to adapt to that. And then ultimately I traded again to Toronto, where I got a chance to be with Butch Carter, different approach, more player oriented because he was a player. And so there's different dynamics that come along with it, but at its core, it's you got to win, and winning is the outcome. But what I've learned is the process is the thing that matters the most, and the value system that you create and how you identify the words that you use, such as teammate, leadership, hustle. You have to define them in a way that everyone inside of the organization agrees with the definition, and you can then hold accountable to and reward based upon the words that you choose.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think one of the things that I noticed throughout my coaching career was the best teams I was a part of were process driven and not results oriented, which is tough nowadays. Like you said, we're in a very win now society almost, right? Like we don't want to know about the process. We want results right now. And the reality is for most teams, most people, even it's a long journey of continuing to grow and continually trying to raise your performance level. And that doesn't happen just overnight. Like you just mentioned, the adaptability of like just going from 30 games to 82 62 games. Just that in and of itself is a journey for any player, let alone becoming like an impact player. And then you're moving to different teams. So I totally agree with you. And I don't think the process gets enough respect nowadays, unfortunately. But you do see this show up time and time again in the really great teams and individual performers as well.
Completely. And when you talk about sort of that microwave swipe, if I don't like type of mindset, we're all conditioned to having the things that are in front of us right now. And the phones are winning the attention game because they're laced full of dopamine. And at an instant, if I receive a text, an email, a notification through social media, it's all about me. And it points to, hey, you're important and you matter and you should see my attention right now. And so that notification game is dangerous because it seeps into our philosophy as to how this player should perform without truly understanding how they even arrived here. What's their origin story? Why do they act the way they act? How can I individually to a specific player, how do I as a coach understand how to relate to who they are and to get the best I can out of them to see their full potential? And it starts with ownership that goes down and cascades down through the leaders that control, basically the business operations and the basketball operations and how those sides ultimately work together. So if there's any disconnect, then players are left to their own vices. They feel like they're not valued. They feel like they have no voice. And that's where, you start to see then, the tapping of the shoulder of, hey, you're great on this side and on this side, no, you're not. And it's instant feedback that you're receiving from this thing, which makes it complicated. So now all interesting stuff and couldn't agree more with, I think, the thought process of the fact that culture and clarity and leadership and how you define those things matter.
Yeah. So important to define them also. Right. We can't just say, oh, this is a problem. We have to actually define, like, what is a problem? What do we think is a problem? What do we define as performing at our highest level? A lot of times we throw out, we need to do things the right way, but we don't actually describe what the right way is. Right. And, you touched on something, and I'm curious how it mirrors a little bit of your career as well. So you talked about like the tapping on the shoulder and being told that, you're great. And we don't really want to like think about the other side, which is, well, you're great if you want to be the sixth man on the bench, but if you want to start, like, this is what you have to do. We're getting so much praise on one side. We don't really want to acknowledge the other. And your career took a turn where you went to go play overseas, not for 1 year, but for multiple years. And ended up eventually coming back to the NBA, but obviously you didn't know that at the time when you went there. So just kind of talk about your mentality and going overseas. Was it, hey, I'm just going to go over here and dominate and come right back? Or were you kind of seeing this as like, okay, so maybe basketball is telling me where I belong? Like, just take us back to that time, because I'm sure that was tough for you to kind of have that realization that going overseas is maybe my best opportunity to come back and play in the NBA.
Yeah, Evan, a great, I think, moment of adversity in my career. So when I was drafted by New York, I was guaranteed 3 years. And so I fulfilled the 3 years, ended up finishing out with the last 2.5 of those 3 years with Toronto, entering into a free agency period where I was frankly minding other people's backyards and watching what they were getting paid, not understanding what it was that I needed to do to contribute to my success. And listening to outside, hey man, this guy got money, you should be getting this much, or this guy received playing time and you should be seeing this, and having this sort of internal battle without understanding that my relationship with, or the CEO of the John Thomas Inc. and its relationship with the Toronto Raptors or any other suitor, understanding the procurement of services that was needed to receive that next deal. So I walked into free agency, not even understanding what to expect within free agency. When my phone wasn't ringing, I felt like I wasn't wanted. The other side of it too was that I was upset at the fact that I had probably improved as a player, but saw less playing time within my final year with the Raptors. So I chose to step away from the game. And it was a point where Dwayne Casey, who was with the Seattle Supersonics, and I think it was Mitch Kupchak with the Lakers at the time, they were calling me to try to see if I would join their team. I was ignoring Dwayne Casey's calls. I claimed that I didn't want to play in the triangle, and that I was going to start a business. And I think I remember there was some rumors that I was having some mental health issues, and it could have been there was mental health. I was just disenchanted with, and frankly, I just didn't understand the business, and I didn't understand how I could have fit into it. So I chose to step away from the game for about 2.5 years. And I gained weight, and I had learned how to build computers. It was a passion of mine. I was just this, I have different eclectic tastes in different things. And I started a business with my ex-wife at the time. And I fell out of love with the process of being the basketball player because I didn't understand how to truly be a pro. So that's when I went to play for China. I went to China for a little bit, and this was the time before they were really even established. And I left after a month because they just didn't understand how to really, let's call it, take care of the player. And then I went and played in the CBA. This is before the D League bought out the CBA, and I played with Dave Yeager, who was actually really instrumental for me because he gave me a lot of confidence to sort of be the player that I was and could be. And then the following year, after I had some knee issues, and I just was like, I'm not sure if this is even for me. I took some time for myself, and then I decided that I want to come back. And so one of my friends who was on the CBA team, his name is Andy Penko, was like, JT, man, like, you need to come out and play in Spain. It's a great country, and so on. So I went out to Spain in Girona. Such a good experience for me because I had to do my own laundry. Sometimes the gyms were cold. The floors were slick. And me, being young and coming from the NBA, I'm complaining about it. No, man, like, this is life. And you need this hard lesson to lump you upside your head, to let you know that all the things that were given to you because you arrived at a location that, yes, you earned, but what got you here won't get you there. And there's actually a book that I love with that same title, but it taught me how to love the game again. It taught me an appreciation for people. It taught me appreciation for culture, for travel, for different foods. And it got me outside of myself, and I needed that. And so the following year is when I went to the Western Conference Finals game back with the Timberwolves during the 03-04 season with Kevin Garnett and crew when they went to the Western Conference Finals. And I sat in the arena and the electricity, and I was just like, I got to get back into the league. So I worked that. It was probably the next couple of days after they had finished and started getting their workouts going again. That's when I started my journey and ultimately ended up signing with the Timberwolves that following year.
Oh, so you were there as a spectator. You were not there as a member of the team. You were just there as a spectator, taking it all in, and that kind of ignited you kind of moving forward.
Yeah, I had just finished my year in Girona, and they wanted to re-sign me for I think a 2-year deal. And I said, no, I'm going back into the NBA because I had made up my mind after seeing that. And I just went to work. So, being in Minnesota, from Minnesota, it was easy for me to go down and be in front of the coaches and spend some time with them and understand what it was that they were looking for. And I just worked my tail off throughout that summer to then come to camp, and then ultimately ended up signing.
Yeah, it's something interesting that you're touching on, which I've always really been fascinated with, is the situation that certain players or certain teams get placed in. Everybody makes a really big deal out of Tom Brady, and he's obviously established himself as the greatest football player of all time. But nobody ever really talks about, had he had to play his rookie year, maybe he doesn't impress as much. Maybe he doesn't really do well at all. And maybe the team moves off from him, and maybe he never gets another chance. As it happens, he sits a year. Then he plays the following year, a full year of development, a full year of learning their system. So when he does play, he has more confidence. And kind of similar to what you described, where you went through all of these experiences playing overseas that you wouldn't have gotten playing in the NBA, right? Like you have your laundry done for you. Like the food is in the hotel on like a huge spread with more food than, everybody on the food
Right.
and their families included could possibly eat in one sitting, to doing your own laundry. Just talk a minute about kind of like your appreciation, not only for being back in the NBA and like being back on the floor in front of the fans, but also your appreciation for that part of your journey that maybe humbled you in a sense.
Evan, it gives me goosebumps as you talk about it, because people always ask me what were the best places that I played in. And I say all of them, because I define best for what it was that I needed at the time, whether it was a happy, great experience, as well as one where when I played in Syria, it was so cold that steam was coming off my body in the gym. And I looked and I literally said, how the hell did I get here? Or in Ukraine, when you're playing in a city called Yuzhny, where it's not far from Odessa, and you're driving the stick shift minivan to practice, and you're looking at the cold stares of people on their face, and you don't understand the gravity of what that does to you. But I appreciate those probably more than the triumphs, because it was, in a lot of ways, I was at Syria, I was going through a divorce. I was looking at my bank account where it continued to dwindle, because I never came from a place of understanding how to cultivate and build financial wealth. Losing my identity because people were saying that I was old, even though I was in my early 30s. And so there were so many things that I look back to that were critical to my personal development. And I couldn't tell you how grateful and appreciative I am for those. Playing in 7 NBA teams in 5 years allowed me to see at the NBA level how 7 organizations conduct business and how they treat their players. Playing in 7 countries over the span of 10 years overseas allowed me to also then see, outside of the NBA, how basketball was conducted relative to performance or engagement, or how the actual business was run. So I enjoyed it all. And I didn't enjoy it at the time. And so when we go through moments like COVID, what we're going through now, or when we go through racial strife and emotion around what's happening in our country, I think it's necessary, and in a lot of ways, it's unfortunate for people who lose their lives, and certainly I don't wish that upon anyone, or I want everyone's health to be. But collectively, I think we need to understand where we're heading. So to that point, I remember sitting in the tunnel when I was able to get back into the NBA, and when KG was, getting everybody pumped up, yeah, let's go in there, right? And I literally had chills as I'm running back through that hallway, because I'm like, I took it for granted. And not many people can decide to basically thumb their nose at the NBA and leave it and take some lumps and decide that, you know what, I made a mistake. Please take me back. And I want another opportunity. And I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity. Now that opportunity was short-lived, and that I played 2 more seasons after that, my first 3 years, and ultimately had a sort of a last-ditch effort to make another comeback. But gosh, did it teach me a lot. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about people. It taught me a lot about culture. It taught me a lot about my even transition into business, which I never thought it would. But as I think about the pieces that made me the type of player that I was, it's led me to become the executive that I am. And I can't wait to see what that'll look like in the next 4 to 5 years, that as I continue to grow and search for real meaning in all the things that we do in profession.
100%. And I think like the respect for the process too is something that I keep hearing being brought up, that you're mentioning. I mean, when you're playing in Serbia or Odessa, it's got to be the farthest place literally from playing in an NBA arena. And you have to realize that there's nothing you can do to get you to the NBA right now. All you can do is go out and have a great game. And then you'll focus on tomorrow when you get to tomorrow. And yes, we need to have vision. And yes, we eventually want to get back there. But like when you're driving that stick shift through the snow, that's all you can really focus on is getting to that next game. So I love kind of the respect for the process. And that respect obviously led you back to the place that you wanted to be. So I think it's a great story. And you mentioned being an executive. That's your current role with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I believe you work with the Lynx as well, the WNBA team in Minneapolis. And just kind of talk to us. Your title is VP of Basketball Development. Define for us what basketball development is. Are you dealing with players? Are you dealing with the teams, or is it the community? Just kind of tell us briefly on what your role is.
Yeah, so the way in which it's structured is overseeing all aspects of amateur basketball right now with a focus on youth development. So that's sort of our community outreach efforts, as well as the way in which we bring fans into our building at a youth level to experience pregame games that they can play on the court, or way in which we put out camps or clinics or tournaments out in the community. So it's sort of that connective tissue that aligns and builds a deeper connection with our community and our organization. So looking at certainly my experiences and being able to draw on what was important and how do I take and shape what's happening in the market, also with what I believe should happen around, let's call it holistic development of people. At the end of the day, there's the transaction of exchanging dollars for services rendered, but if it's not done in a meaningful way that creates a long-lasting relationship with people, recognizing that you have the opportunity to actually care about their pathway, and recognizing that everyone is uniquely positioned to use the game as a conduit for something that goes well beyond their playing basketball. That's the part that excites me the most, right? At some point, you're going to be an entrepreneur or an employee. So if you're an entrepreneur, why would I follow you? And what are the ways in which we look at entrepreneurs through the lens of leadership and a vision that says, yeah, I'm actually going to stake my bets and make sure that I'm going to jump aboard this crazy ride. Or as an employee, if I have one job and you're sitting right across from me, do you understand what your market, your audience wants, and what are the problems that I'm trying to solve? And have you done enough research? And then how do I let you sort of fail forward, but also allow you to reap the benefits of success? So I think that looking through that youth basketball or amateur basketball vertical, that's sort of what we're doing. The other side of what I do is bring our alumni back. So think of front end and now back end. When I look through that lens of what it was like to be a former player in that transition, and recognizing that per capita, we're ranked #1 with Connecticut for top Fortune 500 companies in our backyard. How do we get to our players to get them to understand what's the opportunity that's in front of them? How can they sort of, when the lights are off, cultivate relationships? And also recognizing that the skill set that's needed to be able to communicate and articulate what I'm trying to accomplish and how I should be involved with any one of these companies or any one of these organizations, whether for or nonprofit, why you? And so identifying with each one of them, but that's taken some time because, as players, we think we have this right to the things we received as when we played, and that's not true. So those are my primary functions and roles that I see. So I oversee, teams that help to bring the vision of what that looks like to life. And then in a lot of ways, there are touch points that I create with our current players. There's integration that I have with corporate partners, season ticket members, social responsibility. I'm out in the community. So there's a lot that I do for the organization that I think is useful because as a former player, I can see it. But the other side of it too is just adding additional and incremental value to other parts of the organization to prop them up. So I've been here for a little over 4.5 years, or coming up on 4.5 years, I should say. And it's like everything, you're trying to find your niche, your role. How can you align your passions with the work that you're doing when your feet hit the ground in the morning? You're like, yes. So I'm driven towards that, and I'm thankful and grateful that we're marching towards creating the altruistic vision that I think will do the state of Minnesota and the NBA and sports in general proud.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, I'm just listening to you kind of talk about it. Not only are you touching so many different facets within the organization and also outside of the organization, but it seems like a perfect fit for your perspective that you bring to that role, especially dealing with like some of the players that are within the organization right now, and being able to tell them like, hey, I had to do my own laundry at one point. I had to drive the minivan through the snow to get to a game. Things that they probably don't even realize happen in other parts of the world in their professional leagues. So definitely a great fit for you, and I'm sure you bring a ton of value to that role and to the team. And I just want to kind of, as we wrap up, touch on something you mentioned earlier about growth, and you talked a minute about a holistic development in your role as well. And I'm just curious, like, are there some things that you use in your own growth, or what different ways do you kind of try and utilize through your own growth? I kind of turn to podcasts and books at the moment, but I'm curious if there's anything that you would recommend to us out there, or anything that you're trying to get more into as you kind of continue down your own path of growth and development.
It's amazing that you asked that question. And I think that in my transition, which was, I say athletes die twice, that transition from moving from player where you're at the apex of your arena to the next one where you're that proverbial gladiator, and you're dropping your boots, your sword, your shield, and you're naked. At least that was my journey, because the whole athlete should have a plan B. Well, I didn't have a plan B. And I would argue that because we receive so much attention, and our ability to command the attention and manipulate that spotlight of attention should be wholly dependent on creating two plan A's. Because if I'm creating deposits within that other plan A, then how, when I transition, am I best suited and ready for that transition? So I went to the top of my vertical and I started over, as opposed to when you're moving parallel. At minimum, you should be moving parallel, if not, sort of up the chain within your second path. So I started off really by not understanding how to even ask for a mentor. So I used digital mentors, right? Gary Vee, Simon Sinek, Seth Godin. These were people, and so many others, that when I started to feel the energy exchange and could understand what it was they were articulating, they sort of became my digital board of directors without them even knowing it. And then it was, doing constant research on YouTube, because my business acumen wasn't there. I didn't understand how business was run. And I just researched my butt off. And so through that, I started then learning that, at the end of the day, the whether individual, family, team, organization, we all want one thing, and that's success. The question is, how do we define success? And is it transactional or is it relational? Is it a just cause or is there an endpoint? And once I started picking up on that, then it was, honestly, I spent a lot of time sort of constantly seeking knowledge and looking for more, without understanding that I was spending so much time watering and tending to everyone else's garden, but at the same time, mine was wilting. So I'm now to a space where I realize what my passion points are. I realize who I am. I recognize that as long as I have breath in my body, I want to teach, those that are within this platform how to create success for themselves by using basketball as the conduit. And I think it's probably specific to every other sport, because it comes down to that depreciating asset and how it at some point stops. So what's next, and planning for that. So for me, that's a driving force. And so it just comes down to, how do I take that feeling and bring that into a vision into every area that I oversee? And then how do I empower the people that are leading those areas to hold them accountable, but to make sure that they're being rewarded and honoring the commitment of time. Because I always say that if I'm spending this much time away from my family at work, I owe it to you to be transparent, to tell you the truth, to give you perspective, which also allows you to fail. And because you have an are a core value fit, it's okay to fail. It's what you choose to do after you fail. So I think to that question, I certainly, I'm on Audible and I'm constantly listening to different kinds of books. And it's actually paused for a while because I think I'm head down and working on the building the business and thinking about how this works within the next, not only year, but looking and projecting out 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, like what do we want to become? And how am I positioning this, through our team, and how are we all putting our arms around this? So I would say I've sort of paused on a lot of that right now because I know where I want to be. It doesn't mean that I'm not reading, whether it's articles or, a podcast from time to time, but I'm pretty firmly planted in what I believe. The other places that I am interested in is as I learn more about crypto and some of the ways in which the market is changing. And so rest assured, I'm always, got my head on a swivel on how all this sort of, comes into play, but I'm pretty focused.
Yeah, that's so much great stuff right there. I love the personal board of directors, and they can be people you have had long relationships with, or maybe those relationships are digital. But as long as they have a positive influence on you, they can influence your thinking and have a really positive impact on your life. John, absolutely loved chatting with you. And I think we're kind of scratching the surface on a lot of things, but I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Evan, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Anytime, man.